And we're pretty much in the middle of that part. And if you look in the middle, look for a line that the last word on the line is the word Nisayon. That's where we're going to start with. So first we learned the Maimer from the Alter Rebbe and the Kutu Torah about Nisayon. And then we went to a Maimer from the Tzemach Tzedek, which talks about the same subjects but adds something new. And what I add is that it goes into the fact that there are 5 kinds of tests, 5 kinds of Musyonis. So we started it on Friday, so we'll go back a little bit, so it'll flow a little bit easier. So again, the line that begins the word Nisayon on page 3, and we're starting with Vihine. This mimer is only in Hebrew, we don't have it in English. In the Hebrew, it's in the Derech Mitzvah Sechel Tzemach Tzedek, page Kuf Pei Vov. Vihine. Kama mine b'chines nisayon niskru b'Torah. There are many different kinds of tests that are mentioned in the Torah. So even though he says there are many kinds, but we'll soon see he will be listing 5 different categories. Aleph, the first one is, which is actually this week's Parsha, Welakim Nisos Avraham, Parshas Vayera, where Hashem tested Avraham. What kind of test is that? It's a test, Limsar Nafshay Al Tziva Hashem, to see if he will ready to give up his life to fulfill Hashem's command. So, what we explained Friday was, in other words, it's not just this particular test. Any test that has to do with something challenging me and stopping me from doing a mitzvah. So there's a positive thing that I need to do, whether it's tefillin, whether it's mezuzah, whether it's esrog, whether it's shofar, whether it's tzedakah. I'm supposed to do a positive mitzvah. Like in this case, he had a positive command from Hashem to bring his son to the Akedah. Will he be, how far is he ready to go? Thank you. How far is he ready to go to do this mitzvah? In that case, he was ready to give up the life of his son. So that was like the maximum that a person could be expected to do. Habez, the second category is where it says V'sham Nisohu. What is this? This is when the Yidden were in the desert and they were saying that they're thirsty, there's no water to drink. There is water, but the water was bitter. And Moshe Rabbeinu performed the miracle. He threw a piece of wood in the water, and it was transformed from bitter water to sweet water. So that's a different category of a test. A test that chas v'shalom, a person suffering, will they accept it and realize this is from Hashem, and therefore it's meant to be, and there's a purpose, and Hashem wouldn't do something to me just to torture me. There's a reason why he's doing this, a positive reason for me, and therefore it wouldn't make the person go against Hashem. Unfortunately, there are many people that they failed this test, and because they were suffering, they got angry at God or angry at Torah and mitzvahs, and they abandoned it. So that's a test to see how a person would act in a situation where they're suffering. What was in that case? They shouldn't complain against Hashem because of the lack of water. Similar to this is the test of Iyov. We mentioned Friday there's a whole sefer of Torah which is called Iyov, and it's about a person that suffered in a way that I think the Gemara says no one ever suffered as much as him, and yet he still remained loyal to Hashem. Gimel, what's the third category? The Babur Nasais Eschem Bo'alakim, the Gabi Matan Torah. By Matan Torah, there's a pasuk, just to get it, let's look again here on page 31 in the booklet. It says Hashem is giving you the Torah and so the simple meaning of those words are found in Rashi. Did I say 31? No, this is 33. It's found in Rashi, and Rashi, if you look at Rashi, Pasuk Yud Zayin, Rashi says it means l'nasois. Remember, I told you the word nasoin also means something high. The word I was looking for was a mast on a boat. It's called a nace. So the gadol eschem ba'olam, that the purpose of the Torah is to raise you and to exalt you in the world, that all the nations of the world will recognize that Hashem is revealing His glory to you. That's a simple meaning, Rashi's meaning. But the Ramban says something else. The Ramban, which is on the left side of the page 34, says that this is a test, a different kind of test. The test is how you conduct yourself when I give you a lot of blessing. In other words, Hashem gave us a great gift, a gift which is something which is beyond any kind of any value. It's above and beyond, and He gave us that gift. How will we act because of the gift that Hashem gave us? Will it make us continue to be loyal to Him, or the opposite? Because sometimes one of the reasons why people are not as connected as they should be is dafka because they're very successful and because they're doing well, and whether it's financially or in other ways, they've reached and achieved certain things. And as a result of that, they sort of gain more confidence in themselves and less relying on Hashem. And they sort of think it's all about themselves and their talent and their greatness and their ability to do things right. And in general, when a person is successful and has brachas in their life, it's very likely that this causes the person to become more of an ego, and if more of an ego is less of Hashem. There's a story that they tell about a certain Yid. He wasn't necessarily wealthy. He lived an ordinary life, but he was very big in achnasas orchim, and having guests in his home. And every Shabbos he'd have a full table of guests, and everybody knew this was the house to go to if you didn't have a place to eat. He had a man who was his Rebbe, and he heard everything about him, and he was very, very impressed and very proud that his student is living this kind of life. And one day he decided that he'd like to go see for himself, but to see all these things that people are saying about him, that it's really true. He goes to his house for Shabbos, and yeah, sure enough, the Shabbos table was full of people, all sorts of people, even people that maybe others wouldn't be so comfortable having them in their home. He had the doors open for everybody, and he was hosting them in a very beautiful way. At the end of the Shabbos, this Rebbe told him that he was so proud of him and so happy to see the way he conducts himself. He gave him a bracha that he should become wealthy and he should be able to do even more. And a few months later, things started to turn around in his business, and he started to make more money and more money. He became actually a very big gevir, a very wealthy person. Very wealthy person. He's also a very busy person. Very busy person. Didn't have time to take care of little things. So when people came to him for tzedakah, he couldn't deal with it himself. He told one of his managers to talk to them. And then sometimes it was a little bit too much. So because he became wealthy, so more people came to him. So he didn't sort of make himself so available. And slowly but surely he stopped seeing these people came for money. Slowly but surely he stopped having people in his house by his Shabbos table. And he really dropped the kind of way of life that he lived before. And now this came to the Rebbe's ears. Of course, he was very disappointed, but more than disappointed was he felt responsible. He's the one that gave him the bracha, that he should become wealthy. And now, all of a sudden, as a result of that bracha, rather than giving more tzedakah, he stopped doing all the good things that he did before. So decided to give him a visit again. Came to visit him. This is a few years later. Comes to the Shabbos table. Sure enough, he's there. His wife, his children, all the guests that he saw last time are no longer there. He didn't say anything. He's pacing back and forth. Then he stops by the window, looks out the window, and says, "Who's that man walking there?" He says, "Oh, that's Yossel, the shoemaker." "Who's that?" "Oh, that woman, she's so-and-so, unfortunately, a widow, hasn't passed away a few years ago." "And who's that?" "Oh, these little children, they're orphans, their father passed away a few years ago." Goes on and on and on. And he's wondering, his Rebbe doesn't usually engage in just idle talk, but okay. But then even a more weird thing happened. He had one wall which was just a mirror. The Rebbe stops in front of the wall, looks at the wall, and says, "Who's that?" And he's like, "Who's that? That's me." The Rebbe says, "I don't understand. That's you? Because when we look through that glass, we saw all these other people. And we look through this glass, I see you." So he says, "Rebbe, it sounds like silly to have to explain it to such a great man, but if he's asking the question, he says there's a silver behind the glass. And with the silver behind the glass, it doesn't allow you to see through it, then you see yourself. It's a reflection of you." I see. When there's silver behind the glass, then you see yourself. Yeah. He says again, So when there's silver behind the glass, you see yourself. When there's no silver, you see all these other people. He repeated it once, twice, 3 times, and finally got the message that when you have a lot of money, suddenly you start just seeing yourself, you don't see others. But it's not only money, it's success in general. Success has the nature in it to inflate the person's ego, and naturally that makes us further from Hashem. Of course, it doesn't mean chas v'sholom it has to be that way, but it's a challenge. So that's another kind of a test. How will we react if Hashem gives us abundance? In a certain sense, this is the difference between the tests in Europe and the tests that we have today in the countries we live in today. In Europe, it was a test of poverty. People didn't have money. People were being persecuted by the government. And that was one kind of test. It was hard to be a Jew. The test here in America and in other countries like America, unfortunately, people there's so much assimilation, and it's the opposite. There's so much abundance and there's so much opportunity, and people took advantage of the opportunity in a way that led them away from Yiddishkeit. Then there's a fourth kind of test. Inyan is signed to David HaMelech Olav HaShalom. The test with David HaMelech. Im Yishber Taivas HaYetzer, if a person will break the taiva, the desire of his Yetzer Hara, if something will happen that will attract him to do an Avera. It was alluding to the story of David HaMelech, even though according to all the commentaries in Gemara, and especially in Chassidus, it wasn't really an Avera what he did, but on the simple level, it appeared that something happened, that he sent a certain individual out to war, and then he was killed in the war, and then he married his wife, and it looked like he was doing something which was inappropriate. So on the simple level of Pshat, it means he was attracted to this woman, and he had to contain his Yetzer Hara. Well, a similar story we have in Chumash with Yosef, that the wife of Potiphar tried to get him to do an Avera, and he had to overcome that. So again, it's not only that, it's anything that, any kind of pleasure that's drawing a person and attracting a person. Like in Chumash, the pleasure that Chava saw was a fruit. It wasn't an apple, remember. It was either grapes, or one opinion says it was other fruits, but it wasn't an apple. That's not the Jewish version. But whatever it was, it says in Chumash, Ki taiva hu le'einayim. It was very pleasurable to the eye. So she had a strong burning fire, a burning desire to eat this food, to the point that she violated Hashem's wish. So up until this point, if you put it together, in a sense, you can say there are two sets of tests. One is regarding observing Hashem's commandments, and one is regarding the way Hashem treats us. In other words, one kind of test is how far out I'll go to observe a positive commandment. The other one is how strong I'll be not to violate one of the negative commandments. Whether a person's attracted to food, or a person's attracted to steal money, or a person is attracted to another woman, or a person's attracted to something else which you're not allowed to do. That's one category. Am I going to have the strength to overcome it? Not will I overcome it? Because of course I have the strength. If Hashem gave me the test. The other test is how far out I'm ready to do a mitzvah. How much I'm ready to go out of my way to do a mitzvah. That's one group. The second set is regarding whether Hashem is giving me suffering or is giving me abundance of good. One test is if Hashem makes everything, gives me a lot of good, and the other is if Hashem makes me suffer. Will I overcome that test? So these are, in a sense, 4 tests, but both of them are like 2 ends of the spectrum. One is in positive, one is in negative. One is positive and negative in terms of my my life, whether it's whether Hashem is giving me good and happiness, or Hashem is giving me the opposite. Then we come to a 5th category. V'shekosov, as it says, is just this is continuing with David HaMelech. B'chaneni v'naseni, Hashem, you tested me. So this was a test. Hey, the 5th category is Hanisayin Aniskir Kan, the Nisayin that it talks about in this pasuk. Remember, this mimer of the Tzemach Tzedek is on the same pasuk as the mimer of the Kutei Torah. And what does it say there? Let's look at the pasuk again, because it was a long time ago that we learned it. That was like last week. So let's look again. Page 9 and page 10 and 11. This is a test of how we remember things. So what does it say in page 9? Ki yakum b'kirbecha navi, a prophet will come amongst you, or a dreamer. In other words, someone's going to come along and say, I am a prophet, and I know the future, and I see the future. And he'll tell us certain things which are fascinating. He'll actually give you an omen or a miracle, which means he'll tell you things which shows that he has some sort of knowledge which is beyond the natural knowledge. And he performs some sort of a miracle. Next page. And now this person who did these things, he'll tell you, now that you know that he's a prophet, he says to you, let's go, chas v'shalom, worship other gods. Don't listen to him, because Hashem is only testing you. So what kind of test is this? This is a test of Amunah. It's a different kind of test. Something happened which is challenging my Amunah in Hashem. Here is a person that's telling me not to believe in Hashem. And he's basing it on the fact that he's a prophet and he performs miracles, and he's showing me that he's somebody that of a higher kind of status. And yet, we're supposed to be strong, no matter how convincing it looks, not to chas v'shalom give up our amunah. So this is the 5th category, which is when something specifically happens, which challenges our amunah. The other things don't really challenge amunah. It's more about challenging me emotionally. This is things, good things are happening, bad things are happening. I have to do a mitzvah, and it costs me a lot of money to do the mitzvah. Or there's an avera that I want to do, I'm going to have to give up all that pleasure. It's about emotional issues. This one is more about emunah. That's the 5th category. And I guess all the other tests that we could probably think of would fall under these 5 categories.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Other people are clarifying between 2. If something happens that we're upset and that's an emotional challenge, and 5, that it's a Muna challenge.
I guess a Muna challenge is somebody is trying to convince you. Let's say someone is going to give you a philosophical explanation and prove to you that it doesn't make sense to believe in God. It's not about anything hurting or suffering. It's purely challenging my Muna and Hashem. So I guess if a person comes along and he shows you that he's somebody who's out of this world. He's really not an ordinary person. And he says the right thing to do is to worship idols. That means he's testing our emunah. People look up to him and they think that they should respect someone like that. And there was a time in history where there were hundreds of such people. They were called false prophets during a certain king called Achav. And they looked very holy, but they were telling people to worship idols, and people followed them. I think it says at a certain point where more people follow them than not. So any argument that a person brings up, an argument, intellectual argument, not to believe in Hashem, or even if to believe in Hashem, not to believe that Hashem is this or Hashem is that, or that you really have to keep Torah mitzvahs, these are all issues of emunah. When the soil the gabe man, it also says in the Torah that when the man fell, that was also an nisayon, it was a test. Hagam shalacheru adech nisayon habeis. I would think that the nisayon of the man was similar to the second category, which is la neischa and aseischa, testing us because we didn't have regular food to eat. Achiev shalomer kain. We can't say that because Hakosav Meshabeach Haman, the Torah actually praises the man and says, Taimek Ketzapichis Big Dvash, that it tasted in some sort of outstanding way. It doesn't bring this here, but in other places, the Medrash it says that when they ate the man, they were actually able to taste any taste they wanted. So whatever you enjoy, if you had a mind and you thought that the man tastes like, I don't know, steak, it'll taste like steak. And then it tastes like a pizza, it'll taste like pizza. Don't mix the two because it's more inflation. But and then so what was the test? What kind of test was it? That was also a test of emunah. Why? Again, where do we know that it's in a sign altogether? So look at page 36 and 37. That's the pasuk in Chumash, where it says, this is the parsha where it talks about the man. It's underlined because it says he's testing you. Right after that says, he oppressed you, made you hungry, and he fed you the man. So I would think, oh, this is a test of suffering because he made us hungry. So he asks, how can we say that when it says the opposite, that the test, that the man was something which tasted better than anything else? By the way, there is once who they have explained, even that is a test. Why? When you have the opportunity to taste anything you want in the man, then you can't enjoy it because you always say to yourself, I should have had that taste. I could have had that taste. I could have had the other taste. It's like you find sometimes when you have too many opportunities, you're totally not settled and you're totally not satisfied because everything you do, you think I could have done the other thing, which is better. But again, on the simple level of pshat, it was a food that tasted very good. So what was the test? Test was an amunah. Why? Shelo yashiru mimenu ad boker. They shouldn't leave over until the morning. I just want to explain this a little bit more. Everyone wants to ask the question by Fabrangan, like he challenged us. He's not giving the answer. He wants us to give the answer. And he waited a week till people came back with an answer, which they didn't. The question was that the man is considered one of the big miracles that happen. Baal Shem Tov says that really everything that happens naturally is really a miracle. So what's the difference between nature and a miracle? The sun goes up and down, that's a miracle. Everything that happens is a miracle. A baby is born is a miracle. But because these miracles happen constantly, so therefore we don't call it a miracle, it's called nature. What's a miracle? A miracle is something which regularly, this is not the way it works. Water doesn't split normally. And therefore it's a miracle. So it means the difference between a miracle and nature is not an essence. In essence, they're both by Hashem is making both things happen. Again, if you would ask a worldly person and you say, What's the difference? You'd say, oh, nature happens because of nature. A miracle, that's God. But we believe that nature is also God. So everything, you plant seeds in the ground and trees grow, and it's an apple tree, an orange tree, a banana. So it's because of Hashem, not just nature. So what's the difference? Because this is norm, that you put these seeds in the ground, these kind of trees grows out. But if I plant apple seeds, and I guess pumpernickel comes out, pumpernickel bread comes out, that's going to be very strange. That's a miracle. So the Rebbe is, being that the mun fell every single day for 40 consecutive years, it shouldn't have been considered a miracle anymore. Yeah.
Is it the idea that it fell in just the right amount of quantity?
Yeah, that's not the answer the Rebbe gave, but that could also be part of the answer. But it looks like the miracle was considered just the fact that the mun fell. Like in the place where it talks about the miracle, it just says the miracle that the mun fell from Shemayim. So I'm not going to give you a week to think about it.
So I'm confused. The question is, the difference between a miracle, what's the
The question is, if the definition of a miracle is something which doesn't happen on a regular basis, why would the mun be considered a miracle? The first day was a miracle, maybe the second day. But after it fell every single day for 40 consecutive years, why is it still a miracle?
Because it didn't ever happen before, and the fact that it fell every day for 40 years, I feel like is a miracle.
Well, but once it started, this became nature.
But it didn't become it. Everyone, I feel like everyone always knew it was temporary.
No, I don't think they knew it was going to stop.
But it's not
In the right track. Let's keep going a little bit further and you'll get the answer. What do you want to say?
It's not nature.
Right, but maybe it became nature because now it's happening on a regular basis. Yes, Rivka. What?
They didn't know it will fall every day. Every day it was another Messiah.
Right. They didn't know it was going to fall every day, but how could they not know if it became a regular pattern that it fell every day? What?
Every day they need to believe in.
Okay, so let me just add one more thing, and that is this is the only place where this happened. In the desert, it fell every day, but outside of the desert, it wasn't food falling down from Shemayim. It was at that time there was no such nature in the rest of the world.
Yeah, we could say that about snow. Like there's snow falling in Antarctica, but not in the desert. So why isn't the snow a miracle?
Because snow is not only.
Well, that's because the weather is not the kind of weather for snow. That's the nature of it. But here we're saying that food doesn't fall from Shemayim. It fell in this cubicle where there was a Jews war, and to them it fell. Everybody else in the rest of the world, the nature hadn't changed. So therefore, it's not that nature changed every single day was considered a miracle. Yes?
Maybe because it didn't fall on Shabbat, as if, so it's not a natural thing that it comes out of the sky, that there's some kind of decision being made at a higher level.
I guess all these things would probably add to it, but I think for the Rebbe, the strongest point was that the nature still continued the way it was in the rest of the world. And being that it was only in this place, so therefore it was considered a miracle. But because of that, like Rivka says, every day it ended, and there were people who, how can I be sure it'll be on tomorrow? They didn't trust. In fact, there were people who did that. They would hide from one day to the next day. But Hashem made another miracle that when you hit something, it disappeared. And then Hashem said, don't collect man on Friday, collect for Shabbos. You know, and there were people who didn't believe that. In other words, the fact that they that they trusted every single day that tomorrow there's going to be another miracle, because I wanted to first bring out the point that it still was a miracle. Now, every day they had to believe that tomorrow there'll be again a miracle. You know, there's an expression in Gemara, miracles don't happen every day. It's in Gemara, such an expression. And the fact that so therefore the Rebbe is saying it was a test in Amunah. Moshe said to them, it will happen every day. But you think to yourself, this was a miracle what happened Sunday. How do we know it's going to happen Monday? How do we know it's going to happen Tuesday? And even though it kept happening and happening, it was still every day you needed that amunah. I once saw a story where someone came to a Rebbe, and the Rebbe said to him, so what do you do for your income? So he says, I work in a store, and he pays me at the end of the week. He gives me money for my work. In other words, it's not his own business. He works for someone who just pays him at the end of the week his salary. So then the Rebbe says to him, so what do you do with amunah? Now, when you're running a business, you need amunah every day that you can have customers. You're running a business, you have to have amunah every day that whoever bought stuff is going to pay you back, and people and things are going to work out. But if you're getting a salary on a regular basis every week, then you don't have that amunah anymore. So with the month, they needed amunah every single day. So therefore, the amun was the fifth category of the amunah. That's what he's saying of Nisayan. Then he goes on to explain the same thing we had in our Maimah. Adeh HaNisayan, through a Nisayan, Nizbarer v'yetza ha'tov ha'mustad. The godliness that's in this test, the godly spark, gets elevated, extracted, and that godly spark, nafal ma'olam ha'tov, it fell from the world of Tohu, shenafal lamata ba'davar ha'mastir shemena ba Nisayan. And it fell into this Nisayan, which is something which is blocking Hashem, something which is concealing on Hashem. K'moi, Nebuchadnezzar and Hananiah, Mishael, v'Azariah. I'm not that brilliant to figure out what this stands for because it's very unusual. But on the bottom of the page, they decipher the acronyms. Nebuchadnezzar, there's a story with Hananiah, Mishael, v'Azariah. These were three people who were taken captive in the times of Nebuchadnezzar, the king who conquered Yerushalayim and destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, and they had the same kind of test like Avraham Avinu. They were thrown into a furnace of fire because they didn't want to give in to the other beliefs, and they allowed themselves to be thrown in. And a similar miracle happened to them, like what happened to Avraham Avinu. So that means that fire, that whole situation, contained it a spark from Olam HaTohu, and by them overcoming the test, they elevated that spark. It became Birur Gimel Klipa Shalamata Minega. So by doing that, they elevated not just Klipas Nega, which we usually elevate by eating food and drinking drinks and wearing clothes and using objects that are not necessarily godly, but using it for Hashem. But that's Klipas Nega. Over here, they elevated Shalosh Klipas Atmeis because it's something which goes against Hashem. If you say Yuva Maimer Azal, this also will explain the words of our sages. Rabbi Haruge Lud. Ein kol beria yechoylo lamed v'mechitzason. He brings another example. It says in Gemara, there was an incident where the emperor's daughter was murdered. And they accused the Jews of doing it. It was a false accusation, as usual. And the emperor was in a rage, and he said that if the Jews don't give out the real murderer, then he'll just murder everybody. So there were two people. It was in the city of Lud, I guess. And these two people, they presented themselves as they're the ones that did it. Naturally, they were executed, but by doing that, they saved everybody else. That Mesiras Nefesh. So the Gemara says, that their place in their reward in heaven for what they did is such a place that nobody is able to stand in their chamber. In other words, the light there is so bright and at such a high place that mashma should go even by the tshuva, they're even higher than people who are Bali Tshuva. Why? When a person does tshuva, they're also doing the same thing. They're elevating the sparks that in Gimel Klipas Atmeis. That's what tshuva is. So, even though it says that about tshuva is greater than a tzaddik, why is that? Because a tzaddik, he's elevating sparks in Klipas Nega, which is lower. person who does tshuva elevates sparks. That's in shalosh klipas atmeis, which comes from a higher source. So therefore, through doing tshuva, a person could reach a much higher source than even a tzaddik, because he's elevating the sparks of shalosh klipas atmeis. So what makes these people even higher than those who do tshuva? And the answer is because it was an assignment. That was a test. It was a test. And they passed the test and they're ready to give up their lives to save everybody else's life. And a test is even higher within Gimel Klipas Atmeis, it's higher. Like I explained the other day, that the difference is a regular Avera is something which is Klipa, but it doesn't aggressively oppose Kedusha. But this is something which is aggressively opposing Kedusha, and therefore this is something which is considered a test, and therefore it's lower, and if it's lower, it comes from a higher source. Okay, so we have these 5 categories, and we have this point that he brought out that the Nisayan, it brings das, and the reason is because the Nisayan contains in it a spark of godliness, which is lower than Klipas Noga, and even lower than Shalosh Klipas Atmeis, and therefore it comes from higher than everything else. And when I pass a test, I'm able to absorb the godly spark that I just revealed. Passing a test means I'm redeeming the godly spark from its captivity. I'm revealing it. Remember, I explained last week. What does revealing it mean? I am openly revealing the purpose of what happened. On the surface, it looks like what happened is there's a king or a ruler that's evil, and he's able to stop you from learning Torah. And I'm revealing, no, this is really Hashem who's invested in it, and he allows a godly spark from him to be invested in this person or this situation. And the purpose of that is not to chas v'shalom torture me, but the purpose is to help me rise to a higher level. When I actually rise to a higher level, I'm revealing the ultimate purpose of this spark. Like the mashal we gave, that when the father hides from the child, and then the child finds him in his hiding place, he comes out of the hiding place. Same here. Once we recognize that this is really from Hashem, and therefore, how do I recognize that? How do I demonstrate that I believe that? By not allowing it to affect me, and I do what I need to do. By doing that, I'm revealing the godly spark that's in Shalosh Klipas Atmeis, but even worse, in something which is in the same. The truth is more to go into here, but because it's in Hebrew, it's going to be just so hard to follow. So I'm going to skip and go to the last part. Let's go to the line that begins with the word Zeh. Okay, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines from the end of this paragraph. It's going to explain now that the Nisayon of the Akedah, this is very timely, this week's Parsha, is not what it appears on the surface. That Hashem was testing Abraham if he's ready to give away his most beloved child, that he waited for until he was 100 years old to be finally born, and now he's ready to shecht him because Hashem told him to do that. So he says, no, actually, the Nisayon Akedah was something else. Let's read the words inside. B'zeh yuvan, b'zeh yituritz. You can now answer Madakosha Tuva, a very strong question. Madua iyachas hakosav nisayin da'akedah l'Avram. Why does Hashem and why does the Torah give credit to Avram with the test of the Akedah, Hello, Yitzchak. Wasn't it a bigger test for Yitzchak? Yitzchak was ready to give up his life. I mean, when you look in Rashi, you see something incredible. It says there that Yitzchak said to his father, "Father, I see that you have fire." In those days, they used to carry around a hot coal, and then they would blow on it. That's how they had fire. So I see you have fire. I see you have a knife. You said you're going to do a carbon, but I don't see any carbon. So Avraham Avinu said to him, "You're the carbon." And then it says, "What?"
Didn't he say Hashem will? He told him.
Yeah.
Why?
And then it says, "And they went together." So Rashi says that it said before that they went together, and now it says they went together, indicating that Yitzchak went together with Avram, no different than he went before he knew about it. Nothing changed. First it said he went together. Rashi says Avram Avinu, who knew where he's going, and Yitzchak, who didn't know, they went together equally. That means Avram Avinu was perfectly at peace, just like Yitzchak, who didn't know. And then when it says they went together, it meant that Yitzchak was now just at peace as Avram, as if, just like before, nothing changed. What does it mean? That he was so devoted to Hashem that even though Hashem was asking him to do something so difficult, he was doing it. So there's something deeper here. But again, who should have been a bigger test for Yitzchak? And we always talk about Avram and the Akedah. Actually, the Zohar asked this question. It wasn't a child. Yitzchak was 37 years old. If he wouldn't have wanted to, he could have just said, "I'm not going." So the fact that he wanted to and he agreed to means that he's the one who passed the bigger part of the test, that he allowed himself to go through such a process. So this is the answer of Reb Mendel Haradoker. Reb Mendel Haradoker, very, very unusual to find a name of someone in a mimer, but Reb Mendel Haradoker was a very big Rebbe. It's already time. Let me just finish this, then we'll do it inside. He was a very big Rebbe. He was, in the time, he was a student of the Maggid Mizrich, which means a colleague of the Alter Rebbe. And not only that, but after the Maggid Mizrich passed, because he was one of the senior students, the Alter Rebbe temporarily accepted him as his Rebbe. And his name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel. The Tzemach Tzedek is actually named after him. So all the Menachem Mendel goes all the way back to this Rabbi Mendel of Haradah. So he says like this: the Ikra Nesayim Ba'Akedah, the test of the Akedah, ain't in your Mesiras Nefesh. Not because he's ready to give away his life. Why not? Legabi Avaseinu Hakadoshim. When you talk about our others, our forefathers, She'ein Einim Arkava, they were so connected to Hashem. Milsal Zutrusihi. This was a small thing, giving up their life, giving up a pleasure, even though this was the greatest pleasure and the worst kind of pain of father. And again, Avraham Avinu was the epitome of kindness, epitome of love. He loved every person. He was kind to every person. Imagine his own child. Imagine a one and only child. Nevertheless, he says, the fact that he personally would go through suffering, that wasn't the real test for him. Even though for anybody else, this would be a big test. The big test was that he didn't doubt Hashem. Hashem promised him that your son Yitzchak is going to be a father of a great nation. And now Hashem tells him to bring him as a carbon. How can that be? It's as if Hashem is not being consistent. First he promised him that he's going to be a father of a great nation, and then he tells him he should bring him as a carbon. So the fact that he didn't doubt Hashem, that was the test. So it was a test in Amunah, not a test on something emotional. And what was Abraham really thinking? Think about it. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Yeah.
How was it? If he knew that his son was going to become a father, then it almost makes it not a test. Like if he knew that his son was going to be a father, he knew Hashem wasn't going to do anything.
But Hashem told him to do it.
Right, but
we know later that Hashem only told him to put him on the altar and never said shechtem. But at that time, he thought Hashem really wanted him to shechtem. So what was he thinking? To be continued. In other words, as if Chas v'Shalom, Hashem he wasn't being truthful with him. That's what came out.
But he,
So he was thinking that Hashem would bring him back to life later. What was he thinking? That's
I don't know.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Never done something.
You can say, well, you can shout. That's very fair.
Yeah.